Victor Davis Hanson articulates a sharp critique, positing that Kamala Harris's apparent deficiencies are not merely superficial, but are of such a profound nature that they could fundamentally undermine and potentially terminate her political career.
But we can't get rid of Kamala Harris because that's not who we are. We don't get rid of black women. Kamala Harris, we want you to win, but you've got to win the delegates. And from what we understand, she'd win no delegates. The fear of the Democratic donor class is that Joe Biden is hemorrhaging, and they're looking for ways that bloodletting would be staunched. And they say to themselves, is the economy going to recover?
He highlights the lack of effective tools to address long-standing issues, suggesting these problems won't simply disappear.
And of course, there's people talking about a severe recession, or worse, a stagflation, as we keep printing, $1 trillion every 100 days to spur the economy. And people are saying, well, we don't have a lot of tools to control this because we've had inflation that's not going to end.
Davis questions whether the current political crises will ever truly be resolved.
And then they're looking at, is this they are going to finish? No. Is China going to back off a little bit? No. Is the border going to be closed? And no.
There's a fear among some that today's political climate echoes the turmoil of 1968, with Democrats labeled as leftists.
And so they're looking at this Chicago convention in August, and they're afraid it might be like 1968, where people went home from campus in 68, and everybody said, well, they're Democrats, they're leftists, schools are out.
Victor claims that we cannot dismiss Kamala Harris because of her status as a black woman.
It's quiet. It was pretty quiet. And then suddenly they came out of the woodwork and destroyed Hubert Humphrey at the 68 convention. And nobody thought Richard Nixon could win after his earlier defeat in 1960. And he gave Nixon the election. So they look at all this, and then they say, but we can't get rid of Kamala Harris because that's not who we are. We don't get rid of black women.
To secure a victory, Kamala would need to win delegates, which Victor asserts she cannot.
The media going into overdrive to help Vice President Kamala Harris erase her biggest electoral liability, her far-left record. Despite Harris being rated 2019's most liberal senator by GovTrack, there's been some change to that. Well, the ladies of The View, Democrats, and others in the press are attempting to rewrite the vice president as just a moderate.
He emphasizes that the journey to the election and convention is still long and uncertain.
People have suggested if this bloodletting continues, somewhere in August, sometime in August, the Biden people would release the delegates, and then they would have a genuinely open convention, and they could say to Kamala Harris, we want you to win, but you've got to win the delegates. And from what we understand, she'd win no delegates.
President Biden made his first public appearance since the announcement, anointing his vice president with the ceremonial title of the Queen of the Democratic Party.
And it would be somebody like a Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, or Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, or Gavin Newsom, or someone like that. And they feel that even at that late date, they might have a chance to stop Donald Trump. So people are talking about that all the time. But they're very, very worried that at some point, we got a long way to go to the election and even to the convention. So people are very, very worried that something could happen to Joe Biden, that he is an inadvertent step away from one step off Air Force One into falling, or one slip of the tongue of saying something so outrageous that it would be career-ending, because he can say almost anything to anyone, anytime, anywhere, and we would have her inherit the presidency, step up to the presidency, and then go into the election as the incumbent. So all of these are scenarios that I think imperil the Democrats more than they do the Republicans.
And we're
begin this Sunday morning with the Democrats' rebranding of Kamala Harris with just 100 days until Election Day. After nearly 4 years of policy failures from the Biden-Harris administration at the border, tax and spending leading to inflation, the media is now relaying the Democrat talking points that say Kamala was never in charge of the border after all. And no, she had no role in any economic policy. Well, in fact, the vice president was the deciding vote and the tiebreaker 33 times for Democrat policies, including the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, which totaled $2.5 trillion and sparked the inflation, part of the $7 trillion in spending, which at least in part led to sky-high inflation, currently up 20% on her watch.
There's concern over the Democrats' embrace of radical policies, which could prove disastrous in a general election.
President Biden making his first public appearance days after his party forced him off the ticket and crowned his Veep as Queen of the Democrats. It took only 36 hours for Kamala Harris to lock down enough delegates to become the presumptive Democratic nominee, and doing so without earning a single primary vote. Kamala keeping the momentum going, speaking to a crowd of 3,000 supporters in battleground Wisconsin. It was her first official rally, and Harris took the fight right to Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know, for a party and a media who's continuing to say they need to reclaim and save democracy, they're doing the most anti-democratic thing possible right now. They have removed their incumbent president because he's not electable, and then going with Kamala Harris. And if we have to go back to 2019 again, you have to remember the voters didn't choose her. She was polling at less than 4% in the primary, which is why she had to drop out in less than a year. And, you know, I disagree with what Pete Buttigieg said to Shannon. He said she's being mischaracterized. Well, it's really hard to mischaracterize someone who doesn't have an ideological identity. I have no idea where she stands on most topics.
Yeah, we're going to see the biggest rewrite of a political career that the media has ever done, like since the invention of electricity. I love Kennedy's optimism that this is going to be about issues. I hope it is. I'm afraid that it's just a few of us talking about the issues. I think a lot of people are just talking about personality and the memes and stuff like that. And of course, I think that's the sort of the strategy that Democrats are playing. But this is why you have an actual campaign, why you have a primary, is so that these things, they're now in a situation where she is getting her first big exposure as a presidential candidate.
Victor suggests that the Democrats' internal chaos is revealing flawed policies that will backfire.
And it's during the general election, and everybody is pawing through and finding all these crazy Democrat red meat policies that are going to be terrible in a general election, but she's having to struggle with them right now. If you want Donald Trump to do well, that's a good thing, but I still worry that there's going to be such an effort to make this as hysterical as possible, to talk about whatever they have to talk about so that they don't have to talk about the issues. Because when you go through that list of issues that you just did, like defunding the police, open borders, abolishing private health care, the Green New Deal, all these kind of things, it's a total loser for Kamala Harris. And Trump is right on all of them.
It's like there's a bat signal that comes out to tell them exactly what to say. And 1 minute they're this way, then they're this way, but they're all in unison. Mm-hmm. So you have these two competing factions that are going to arise, and it's not going to be left versus right. It's going to be fantasy versus reality. The fantasy is going to be the media narrative machine. That narrative will tell you Kamala is absolutely amazing, historic, and she's going to show Trump to be old and racist, the greatest first day of any presidential candidate ever. Then, on the other side, you're going to have the basket case theory. As time goes by, you will see the flaws, the weirdness, until you realize, holy hell, she's a basket case. So the goal for the media is to get you to stay in the first narrative without ever seeing the second. They did this with Joe, right? They tried to stay in the he's as sharp as a tack narrative and not, oh my God, he's a basket case. So again, it's not left versus right. It's not like I hate Kamala Harris. It's like, no, we're just saying that's fantasy, this is reality. The New York Times had 8 of their prized columnists grade potential candidates on electability. She was the last, and she was seen as fundamentally weak and floundered as VP.